Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Coming at you live is Greener Pastures. We will be on in a second with Jonah Lanto of the Good Talk Network, and we'll get rolling here. Jonah, can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. We are live now. Sorry for the delay, everybody. There was a little bit of traffic coming in, so a bit of wintry.
We made it, Dave. How are the roads out there in Fargo?
You know, the Fargo part isn't bad. The bad part is people coming in from the highway on I-29 South. They're driving awfully slow.
Right on. Wow. Safety first, I always say, Mr. Owen.
Yeah, well, when you're in a hurry, they don't like it when you go 85 down the highway.
All right, so welcome everybody to the Greener Pastures radio show. I am, of course, Jonah Lanto of the Good Talk Network. Podcast extraordinaire. Find us at facebook.com/the Good Talk Network. We're doing a lot of cool stuff. And the main host of this show, the one and only chairperson of Legalize ND, Mr. David Stewart Owen. Some of us call him Dave.
Thanks for the intro. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful, buddy. I'm always excited to chat with you. I feel like I learn something new every time we do this show. And for me, we're discussing topics that are very relevant on a personal level in our state, as well as across the country, as we discuss various topics from the cannabis industry.
Yeah, so why don't we segue into what we're doing for the show, and we'll do our first read and we'll get into it. So I think on this show, we're going to talk about political conflicts in the movement, primary elections in North Dakota, and psychotropic mushrooms, whether or not they're good or bad for the movement. Stay tuned. We're going to read our first ad read, and then we'll come right back. As a reminder, you are listening to KRFF 95.9 LPFM Fargo Moorhead. Our call-in number is 701-478-4959. And this hour of programming on KRFF 95.9 LPFM is being underwritten by the Drunken Wrath Brewing Company. Drunken Wrath Brewing, located in downtown Fargo at 630 First Avenue North, has an ever-changing menu of experimental and seasonal brews. You can also visit their website to see their updated menu at drunkenwrathbrewing.com. Open Tuesday through Saturday. That's the Drunken Wrath Brewing Company in downtown Fargo. I'm going to be having lunch there, so.
Dude, I'll be swinging through there next time in Fargo. It sounds outstanding. I feel like that place wasn't there last time I visited.
No, Drunken Wrath is fairly new. They're a great local brewery.
Cool. Yeah, I love. Gotta support those local breweries, man. I like it.
Yeah.
So let's chat now. You wanted to discuss today political conflicts within the movement, and can you just kind of elaborate? We're talking specifically within the political conflicts within the cannabis industry. Now, are you looking at this on a state level or national?
So what I'm generally talking about is that we can talk national, but the goal here was to talk about state level, because typically when you have people going to legalize marijuana, you have one of 3 to 4 groups are really interested in doing it. There's a little bit more, but 3 to 4 I think is fair. You have the people who want to use the substance, and that's kind of the beginning and end of it for them. I'll call them the selfish, but they're also people who just want it legal so they can use it. Nothing wrong with that.
They just want freedom. They just want freedom, baby.
Yeah. You've got the people who are looking for some degree of restorative justice, as in people who believe that the war on drugs was racist or deeply hurt specific communities, and as a result, we need to legalize it in order to restore these communities. We need to spend money from legalization to restore them. So that's kind of more the liberal take on it.
Dude, that individual aspect right there is like something we could do an entire show on.
Yes. And I'm not trying to strawman them, but generally that's their primary reason, is it's a racist policy that's impacted communities of color, and so we need to end it so that we can move forward and no longer have these racist relics of the 1930s and 40s.
Well, and it certainly has, but I would go a step further just to say it is not only people of color, but I think it's targeted people who are of a lower income.
Correct. That's another argument they frequently make. The third group are people who are just we need the money. They're tax folks. They want to legalize it for the tax revenue. The fourth are people with some criminal record of some description who want it wiped away. And then the fifth are kind of a combination of all of those. And as a result, you've got a camp that goes all the way from strictly fiscal conservative reasons all the way to, we'll call it hardline progressive reasons. And as a result, leaders in the movement tend to clash, and they tend to lose sight of the bigger picture sometimes. And it causes problems because when you're divided on other issues, it makes it harder to work with somebody because now you feel like you're giving the other team a leg up. And I've seen this happen, and what happened at the federal level is a huge example of this, but even at the state level, Representative Gretchen Dovervich's bill, in my opinion, got killed because it was introduced by Representative Gretchen Dovervich. It was a simple bill that would have legalized edibles for the medical community. And people's attitude was, well, we can't let the Democrat get a win here.
Yeah, I was going to say, identity politics has certainly stymied the effort on multiple levels numerous times. And it's tragic when ideology gets in the way of progress.
And the other thing is people need to realize that you can't go out and be effective on 8 issues at once. So what people will often do is they'll split into the left-wing clique and the right-wing clique, and they won't ever work together, and they'll often be canvassing the same areas in direct competition. This actually happened in Measure 3. We had people who were literally door-knocking the same neighborhood, the same houses, carrying Measure 3 literature, knocking for Kevin Cramer and Heidi Heitkamp. And it was a huge waste of resources because they lost sight of the bigger picture, or I guess to them maybe the bigger picture was this Heidi Heitkamp, Kevin Cramer race. But what you understand is you're starting to fragment your activist base when you do that. You can't get political on too many things when you're a leader in the movement. If you're just a guy, knocking doors or whatever, sure. But leadership can't fight over messaging. You have to have a message and move forward.
Yeah, and on the surface, you're looking at a situation where it seems like the message is we want cannabis regulation. We want to legalize the substance, and we want to create a taxable industry and create jobs. And it would seem that should be enough to get everybody at the table working together. But as you said, each party has a subtext. Each party has a sub-motive that might even be more important to them on an individual level than the bigger picture. And that's where you get into the political conflicts and the divide and conquer, or you get into the aspects where people want to undermine one another.
Right. No one wants to understand that there's got to be kind of a central guiding force on the ship, and everyone's got to keep the same message rolling. And a lot of times the message that we want to say isn't the message that's politically viable to say. You've got to sell to your audience. So, for example, if I have someone knocking in Rick Becker's district who's an ally to the cause, very conservative, I'm not going to give them the same talking points as if they're knocking in Marvin Nelson's district, which is near the reservation, tends to be more liberal. So if you're knocking in different districts, you have to put aside, you're not trying to sell them your opinion on why it should happen. You're trying to sell them the idea that it should happen. So you should message what's most effective to that area. And that's another big issue.
Yeah, you can't necessarily approach every... Well, maybe you can. Can you not approach every district with the same message if you're waving the unified banner of cannabis legalization?
So there's 2 messages here. There's the macro message, and then there's the micro message. The macro message is we want marijuana legalized and controlled and regulated, and it will be a good thing for the state of North Dakota. That's the macro message. And that's usually followed by a slogan. Last time was "It's time." We're still trying to figure out what it will be this time. But last time the slogan was "It's time," and that was the macro message. The micro message was, well, why is it a good thing for North Dakota? And why do you want it regulated and legalized? And that's where...
That second message, Dave, is where I feel like more people can identify with the progress and with the idea of cannabis regulation, simply because there are a lot of people who probably don't fall under any of the 5 categories in which you identified as we started this conversation. They're simply bystanders. They're not using it. They don't want to use it. Nobody in their family uses it. They're not related to anybody or have any friends who have been persecuted wrongfully under the ridiculous war on drugs, specifically against cannabis. They're just people on the sidelines. They're just residents, right? They have no dog in the fight. And I think oftentimes those are the people we need to connect with, and we need to get them to sit on our side of the fence and to respect the idea of, I think, the libertarian ideal that appeals to many North Dakotans is what my neighbor is doing or what anybody else is doing. If it's not harming anybody, it shouldn't be against the law, right? And I think those are the people that we need to sort of appeal to and get them to sit on our side of the fence.
Well, I would agree with that. I would agree with that 100%. This comes into the you don't know when to stop talking effect. So if you get someone on your side, thank them and kind of leave. Don't try and talk with them about other issues. Because usually what happens is people assume that, hey, this person agrees with me on this. I've made a connection with this person. Let me try and sell them on the other things. And ironically, you end up unselling them on the thing you are trying to convince them of. You can't oversell.
Yes, I'll tell you what, even outside of this conversation and outside of this endeavor, that's simply good life advice right there, Dave. Because sometimes if you let somebody talk and they keep going, man, chances are eventually they might say something you don't like, and then suddenly you've made an ally into a potential ally into somebody who just doesn't give a crap anymore and is done with it and doesn't want to hear from you anymore.
Yeah, so once you get the answer you like, thank them and wrap it up quick is, I guess, kind of the uniform consensus we've come to in this conversation. But the other thing I've noticed is the fights. The worst fights that tend to happen in movements are not between, for example, me and Bob Weefald. Those were never the worst fights. The worst fights were between people that fundamentally agreed on most things, but not on the details. And I've always thought that was fascinating. And that's kind of the infighting thing. The most brutal fights you'll have.
Is this a reference to the push toward cannabis regulation as a part of the North Dakota Constitution, as opposed to the push of the initiated measure just to legalize it?
Well, no, not specifically. That group isn't really involved in what I'm exactly talking about. I'm talking about what I've seen, for example, on the state legislative floor, what I've seen when I talk to people who I work with. The biggest moments when people are hurt and the times when they fight the most are with people who agree with them most of the time and have let them down on this thing. And it's kind of a weird human phenomenon that kind of, for example, Bob Weefald, I expected to disagree with everything I said, period. But
he might have disagreed with you so much to the point that he wasn't even listening to anything you had to say. There are oftentimes, I think, people who hear one thing and they're shut down. Whatever you say after that, because you opened with something they are not going to agree with, they are going into shutdown defense mode, and regardless of the truth or logic that you might present them with, that's it. Game over.
Yeah. But what hurt more was when people like Rick opposed something. For example, when we were on the state legislative floor, Peterson and I were talking about this a while back. When we lost people on home grow, a lot of people felt really hurt by that. And they weren't upset at, say, Judy Lee. They were upset at, say, Roars Jones. Well, that's a bad example because she's not in the Senate. Roars would be a better example. They were upset by that. And I was like, well, why are you so upset at X but not Y? Well, X is supposed to be on our team. And that's another thing you got to understand. You can't get mad at your friends when they disagree with you more than you would get mad at your enemies for disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
Because that's how you lose friends.
Yeah. Yeah, that can get ridiculous. I think that is another tragedy of some of these situations, as you said, is a great example for the people who wanted home grow, and that is freedom, right? That's by definition. Most people, I would believe, that are pushing for cannabis regulation and legalization are in pursuit of freedom, and that freedom would include being able to grow your own crops at home, and realistically, not an absurd request to want as part of that freedom, but getting the people who are against the movement to agree with that, it's a big hill to climb.
Yeah.
And you have to pick your battles. You have to be realistic with how much you can achieve.
Right, and sometimes you learn by asking for too much. You can always ask for everything when you first come to the table for a negotiation, but when you come back with your second offer, that's when the real bargaining begins. I don't know if anyone's ever watched Pawn Stars or Storage Wars or shows of that nature.
Shark Tank. I think that'd be a more efficient example in this case. I guess when I approach sales, there's like a rule in sales. If you're trying to pitch somebody on a certain sell, the first person to throw a number out there is already losing the battle.
Right.
So at the very least, if it's like, well, you could throw a number out there, and if you start too high, oh, that's too rich for my blood, I'm out. Some people, if you start too high, they won't even counter offer you, right? So it is a bit of a game in that regard.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with being shot down the first time and coming back with a counter. But once you start countering, you have to make it has to be a reasonable counter. And that's where I think people lose the understanding, and forgive the phrase, the art of the deal. But the art of the deal here, we are kind of in a negotiation, and we have to negotiate.
Yep. And you have to be realistic with what you can achieve and what policymakers are going to agree with. And in that instance, of course, unfortunately, the home grow situation was something that you kind of had to relinquish.
Yeah, we
much to the chagrin of everybody supporting the legalization movement,
including me. But Senator Larson introduced that bill, and it got, I think, 5 votes on the Senate floor. It was the only bill that was resoundingly defeated. That we got introduced. Everything else we got introduced either passed or was close. Gretchen's was close. Gretchen, I think, lost by, call it 10%. It was like 40-60. That's still reasonably close. That's you're almost there. But that home grow was so bad, and people were very upset by it during the legislative session. I was just like, look, we're not going to get it. It's clear at this point we can't get it this session. We probably can't get it next session.
Right, and at that point, if you continue to pursue it, you're wasting time and resources.
Well, not only that, you're shutting people down, because now it looks like you don't want to meet them. It looks like you want them to give, and you're not willing to give. All you want is to get. You've got to give to get.
Compromise, my man. Compromise is key in these negotiating situations, and I have a certain level of respect and admiration for individuals or organizations who are staunch in their beliefs and in their values and not wanting to move away from them. But at the same time, while I have a level of respect for that, if you're so staunch in your stance that you're unwilling to compromise, well, then you've created a negative. You're taking your values, you're letting your values and your ideals get in the way.
There's always a time to stand to your guns, and there's always a time to compromise. And the key is, and it's a balancing act, right? Because you don't want to you don't want to sell too early, but you don't want to leave the entire negotiation with nothing. And it is a balancing act, and it's a little bit of a talent figuring out where it is, and we all have to learn it.
In summary, before our next read here, where does that leave us in North Dakota? Are we positioned properly to win this thing?
I certainly think our measure is. Full disclosure, by the way, I think Well, it'll be public in a couple days. We'll deal with it then. But I think our measure is, I think that the biggest hurdle is going to be obviously just winning over that remaining 10%. I think we've got something that can do it. It's going to be tight, but it's doable. It's not impossible. And I think there are people who want what won't happen.
Well, yeah. Once again, we should be over the hump of, well, that's a poorly written measure, and that was the drum that was beat all over North Dakota.
Oh God!
To help defeat Measure 3, and at this point, I would like to believe you don't have that now. Whatever your game is, whatever your strategy is going to be to speak against the cannabis legalization movement in North Dakota, you're not going to have that as a weapon against this movement.
Yeah, this one was literally written by Legislative Council. Obviously, we told them what to write, but this was written by the exact attorneys that are used to write bills and laws in the state of North Dakota, as if it had been written by, you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that's the proper way to go about it. So, again, a big mechanism of their effort to undermine cannabis legalization is now removed. So
right, and obviously that made it take a heck of a lot longer than I think anyone would have liked to get out and roll out. But it is rolling out, and I wish we'd been collecting in July too, but it wasn't going to happen. We budgeted to submit by December 15th, and God willing, we will submit Thursday. We have most of the packets. I've worked with you personally, figuring out that situation. And
yeah, I think people are going to be happy when they see this.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they are.
Yeah.
As a reminder, you are listening to KRFF 95.9 low-power FM radio serving the Moorhead-Fargo area. Our number is 701-478-4959. This is Greener Pastures. And this section of the show is underwritten by the Aquarium. So coming up at the Aquarium, we have a bunch of great shows. One that really interests me is our own show, where KRFF 95.9 presents, and it's designed to support us, and it's coming Thursday, December 12th. We're still looking at booking all the acts for that. I think it's going to be a wonderful show. We always do a great job, but for something a little bit more recent, coming up this weekend, is it's called Cashy on Friday, December 6th. It's featuring Grand Forks Hip Hop and the Zen People. Dakota, Phi, Duro, Cold Front, and Zay. It's hosted by Buddy Vegas, and the doors open at 9. It's going to be a great show.
Cool, yeah. Dakota's from Minot, where, of course, my hometown. He's a pretty talented guy.
Yeah.
I actually should be having him on as a guest on the Good Talk podcast in the not-too-distant future. And just a quick reflection on Mr. Ryan Cold Sweat Tetzloff was a recent guest of mine for the first time on the Good Talk network. Just an outstanding dude. It was an outstanding show. A lot of you, I think, I would assume maybe many of our listeners are familiar with him. He's pretty well known in the Fargo area. I know he has his own hour on RadioFreeFargo.com as well. Super talented dude. If you've never seen a Cold Sweat show, get out there and check the dude out. And if you want to learn more about his aspirations and his goals and how he discovered hip hop, certainly a pretty stellar podcast episode of the Good Talk with Mr. Tetzloff.
It's a great.
Cool. He's such a cool dude. I became an even bigger fan after having him on my show and just getting to know him and his story a little bit better. Just awesome guy.
Yeah, I think you and I mentioned that. I think I was the one who recommended him on the show, and you made it happen. So.
Yeah, well, and he's got a lot of connections to Minot, being originally from there, and it's funny. One of those people that I have 110 mutual friends with, but I don't have any idea who he is. One of those scenarios. But yeah, it was good stuff. I just got to throw the guy some love. I appreciate what he does out there, and his live shows are just a total blast.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen him since 2012, 2013. Every time he brings his A game.
Well, dude, yeah, you almost were seeing him at the beginning. Really, that was kind of at the upstart for him, according to some of the stuff that he shared with me. So he's come a long way since then.
Oh yeah. So I think
spent some time down in Austin honing his craft, but Yeah, moving on, of course, this is Greener Pastures Radio. David Stewart Owen and myself, Jonah Lanto, talking the cannabis industry. And you wanted to move into the primary elections in North Dakota. And how can we make sure we are getting pro-cannabis candidates on the ballot to begin with?
So I want to make sure that people understand this distinction, because most people think, oh, I just go vote in the general election and I have 2 to 3 options. This year it might be 4. I don't know if the Greens will make it, but there's usually 2 to 4 options on your ballot of who to vote for. Well, the question I want to pose to people is if they know how those people get on there, because that's the important thing. There's actually an election before that called the primary election, and that happens every July usually. It's like July 9th, somewhere in there. It moves a little bit depending on the calendar, and as a result, you get to vote for people in your primary election. And this is arguably a more important election than the general election for influencing party policy. And here's why. Once your candidate's on the general election ballot, they are now campaigning against the other party. It's no longer about disagreements internally. It's about we have to defeat the other guy. And that's usually their selling point. It's some variant of if X takes over, the country will be destroyed. This is the most important election in years. X is up for grabs. Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton on Sunday. Something ridiculous like that. It gets worse every year, I swear.
I don't disagree.
And from there, it's no longer about internal party policy. You impact internal party policy in what are called the primary elections. And in North Dakota, they are rather late, but you'll go to your ballot box and you'll see 2 different candidates, in theory, if it's contested primary, running for office for the Democrats and 2 running for the Republicans. And you can only vote in one of them. You'd have to choose, do you want to vote in the Democrat or the Republican or the Libertarian? I think the Libertarians will have a primary this year. And you would have to pick who do you want from that list. So what I think is the most important thing is currently the Republican Party and to a lesser extent the Democrat Party are split on whether or not they want to see cannabis legalization go through. So if you are a Republican, please vote in the primary election. Find out where your candidate stands on cannabis, and if there's 2 equally qualified conservatives, vote for the one that leans more towards you. And if you do this enough, you'll start flipping primary options, which flips the general option. So now you don't have to stomach and vote for a Democrat if you don't want to. You can vote for your Republican.
Right. Now, beyond simply addressing my potential candidates directly with the question, do you support cannabis legalization? If I don't have that opportunity, I don't want to do that. Is there a way that I can seek this information out directly online?
Yes, but it's not done yet. So candidates have until, I believe, April to declare they're running for the primary, which means that in the spirit of fairness, we will wait until the last day that you can file to be a primary candidate, and we will be sending out an email questionnaire to all of the candidates, and from there we will be giving a score based on their answers. And it's going to be it's a 5-question thing. It's really simple. Question 1, do you believe that marijuana should be available for medical use? Question 2, do you believe that the current medical marijuana system is adequate or needs improvement? Question 3, would you support the legalization of the consumption of edibles for medical patients? Question 4, do you believe marijuana should be decriminalized? Question 5, do you believe marijuana should be legalized? That's going to be it.
So every potential candidate in North Dakota will receive that questionnaire.
Yes, and based on their scores, they'll get either an A, B, C, D, or F. It's going to be really hard to get an F.
So, right, of course. But it's fantastic that we have yourself and the Legalize ND organization working toward providing that information. I'd like to think that, there aren't many candidates that are campaigning specifically on cannabis legalization, and it's something that you and I have covered previously. A big reason for that is there's simply not a lot of donor money in pursuing that route, either on the local level or the national level. But at the very least, it will give people an opportunity, because I firmly believe, Dave, there are many Republicans, there are many conservatives in North Dakota who strongly feel that cannabis use, possession should not be a crime.
Well,
now, is that primarily what they are going to base their vote on? I don't think so. But I know for a fact that is on the minds of many North Dakotans, most of which are conservative Republicans.
Well, heck, I know that most of our sponsors are conservative Republicans. Spoiler alert.
Right there on the bill.
Yeah. So that is very true. There are a lot of conservatives who want to see this, but they're not going to vote Democrat over it. So
of course they're not, and it's like I want to battle that stereotype a little bit that has hung around and stuck around for far too long, that the only people who want to see cannabis legalized are dope heads, are lazy stoners, are people without jobs, or people who just want to smoke weed. And that's simply not the case, Dave.
Yeah. We've got a multimillionaire landlord out of a great small town. We've got one of the most successful farmers in the area of Grand Forks. We've got city councilors. We've got lawyers. We've got professional accountants. We've got executive directors of nonprofits. We've got a lot of successful people who want to see this happen. There are a lot of people who are very interested in this. And
right. At some level, it's like we sort of need to champion those people out there to the general public, maybe a little better than what we had with the Measure 3 movement, simply so that people can identify with the fact that, successful people who are upstanding citizens with families and careers, goals and aspirations, who want to see cannabis legalized / decriminalized and regulated like any other respectable industry in the country.
I agree with that 100%. Back to what I was trying to say. What we want to do is, like I said, we want these Republicans to be able to go and vote for the primary to try and push the Republican Party to be more cannabis friendly. And it's a huge deal in getting endorsements. It's a huge deal in moving the wheel forward. If let's pretend there's two candidates and let's pick on Hillsborough. I'm going to pick on you, Aaron, even though I know you support me. And let's pretend Aaron McWilliams and another guy are running in the primary, because they will be. And let's pretend one of them isn't cannabis friendly. If you were to vote for the cannabis-friendly guy and beat the non-cannabis-friendly guy in a primary that is only of Republicans, what Republicans are now going to see is, wow, there's a lot more of us than we think there are, one. And what the legislature is going to see is there's a lot more of them than I thought there were, and it's not going to jeopardize my seat.
Yes, yeah, that's such a great call to action for Republican voters who want to back a candidate. And if you are coming down between two candidates and you kind of like them both, one of them's for cannabis and one of them isn't, if all these kind of cannabis pro Republicans are getting votes, and we can attribute it to the fact that these are individuals who support sensible cannabis regulation, yes, they are going to recognize that, and it will make a difference.
Right, and that's just one of the most basic things you could do. And the best thing about being at the ballot box, you're private. So let's pretend you've got a job at the sugar beet plant at American Crystal Sugar, and you can't exactly be public. You can't have a Measure 3 sign in your yard. When you go into that ballot box on July, because that would be when the primary is, you're completely anonymous, but you're still able to send a message while remaining anonymous.
Yeah, again, another very relevant point, a very relevant topic to point out, because I know a lot of people, given the industry they work in, could not be publicly vocal about their support of cannabis legalization for fear of repercussions within their professional career, which I think is unfortunate that you have to sort of hide what you believe in because of that. But at the end of the day, yeah, there are definitely people who can't, like you said, they can't have a Measure 3 sign in their yard, and because of the industry they work in, but they are firm supporters, and we need those people for sure.
Right. And now I think we're going to kind of conclude everything with one last segment. Just a reminder, You are listening to KRFF 95.9 Low Power FM radio serving the Fargo-Moorhead area. This is Greener Pastures. Our call-in number is 701-478-4959. Moving forward into our last segment before we play our song and end out the show is the magic mushrooms or psychopsin movement. And how does that movement impact us?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that real quick, too. I just wanted to remind everybody listening, maybe you're catching up at the tail end of the show. The audio for Greener Pastures is being published to YouTube, and we'd love to have you guys share that. We'd love to have you share radiofreefargo.com. I think it's outstanding that anywhere across the country people can tune in to our show or other content provided by Radio Free Fargo. They've got a lot of cool content, a lot of cool hours. But the Legalize It ND takeover, I think, is what it's looking like on YouTube.
Yeah, we got to fix that.
Yeah, get out there and share it. If you get to the Legalize ND YouTube, the audio for these shows is uploaded, so you can take it with you and listen to it wherever you go. So just a quick shout out for that before we dive in. And so, Dave, we wanted to sort of discuss there is a pretty strong recent movement in the United States to decriminalize psilocybin, a.k.a. magic mushrooms. We've seen it in Denver. Now there's a big push in California, specifically in Oakland. And a lot of the progress regarding what I view as progress regarding psilocybin magic mushrooms, people are using it to better themselves. They're finding it is massively beneficial, specifically for veterans with PTSD and people with various types of social dysfunctions. I mean, hell, Dave, people are using it to quit smoking cigarettes. Like, it's working. Like, there are physiological interactions that our body and our mind undergo when we use psychedelics. And generally speaking, these are a tool and a resource and a potential medicine that can help people. Now, whether or not that's good for the cannabis movement, I can't say. But when I look at what is good for society, what is good for freedom, that's a step in the right direction.
For freedom, yes. I think for the movement, no.
Yeah, I don't disagree that it might not be good. It's probably not good for the movement, especially a big part of our discussion today. We sort of talked about the people who are kind of on the other side of the fence or sitting right on the fence, and they're unsure of whether or not they want to support legalizing cannabis because of their concern. Well, once you legalize the marijuana, well, then they're going to want cocaine, and then they're going to want heroin, and then they're going to want mushrooms. And where does it end? Where does it stop? That is, unfortunately, a powerful voice in detracting from cannabis legalization.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. I think it actually hurts us a lot more. I think sometimes people try and push an idea before its time has come, and they don't understand the consequences of that.
No, they don't. You're right, but if we could just get people to look at the research, if we could just get people to look at the helpful benefits. I mean, we're talking about, and I hate to use it as like a political pulpit, but the people who benefit most from psychedelics as a form of medicine are veterans, are people and people who have faced massive and severe trauma in their life, specifically traumatic brain injury. Well, this is a critical segment of our population who has done more for the American people than many of us will ever do in our lives, that stand to benefit considerably from the use of psilocybin or MDMA as a treatment for various social dysfunctions.
Right, and I understand the argument. I haven't had time to read up on the research. I really should. My political leanings are basically, I don't care that much either way.
Dude, John. I mean, this what should ring a bell to people? Johns Hopkins University just got federally approved to study the effects of magic mushrooms as a medicine to treat traumatic brain injury. What, we only got a few minutes here, but our brain is an information superhighway, right? We have somewhere above 5 billion plus neurons that are interacting in our mind to help us function, to help us think, to help us react, right? That's how we view the world, through that lens. Now, what happens oftentimes when you have a traumatic brain injury or you have PTSD is the highways with which those neurons interact with one another, the roadblocks get put up, right? They can't communicate properly, which creates a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the problems that these individuals tragically face. Now, when you introduce psilocybin, and when they're doing this, it's not like they're giving people a bag of mushrooms and saying, all right, here you go eat these mushrooms and take a heroic dose of mushrooms and you're going to be all better. No, they're taking guided trips with a licensed professional. There is a system in place that allows for them, and oftentimes these are very small doses. You can have the positive effects on your brain that help you improve and get better from PTSD without having this psychotic trip where the walls are melting and you can see the world breathing. That's not required for your brain to get better from these injuries under the use of psilocybin or MDMA. So when you've got a university like Johns Hopkins that is conducting this study and they're having tremendous results, tremendously positive results. It's research and that cannot and should not be ignored. And again, I know, does that help the movement of cannabis? Maybe not, but what we have to do is get that information out. We have to help people understand the research, that this isn't just some crackpot throwing psychedelics that somebody did.
No, I know you, and you're a very professional guy. Everything you basically argue, you source. And that is one thing I will say about Jonah 100%, whether you agree or disagree with him, he's got sources, he's got peer review for what he says. What worries me, though, is I think this is a bigger problem. I think this comes down to the problem of right to try. I think if you're very sick and you're suffering and you're dying, you should be allowed to try just about anything. If you can't tell me that you can't sleep at night, right, and you're tossing all over the bed and you've got real diagnosis, like we're talking DSM-5, a real diagnosis, you should have the right to try something. Now, should it have to be in a monitored condition? Absolutely. Should it have to be in front of a medical professional? Yes. But medical professionals should have the right to go off-label and try things for people that are very sick. I mean, what's the worst that's going to do? I hate to make the joke, kill them, but what's the worst it's going to do? They're basically already dying at disastrous rates.
Yeah, and that's a critical point of emphasis, that during these trials and these studies, that these individuals are doing it with a professional at their side, guiding them through, helping them navigate past traumas to get better and to heal. And ultimately, that's what we have to kind of focus on. So, no, it's a subject I'm very passionate for. I'm a huge supporter of MAPS.org, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and just for all the individuals that are helping push this movement to really help some of our best people get better and navigate their trauma. So, no, cool stuff, cool subject, and a great conversation today, Dave. I know we're throwing out a banger of a song to the folks here.
Can you tell them what it is?
Baby, it's Achilles' Last Stand by Led Zeppelin, one of their best songs and maybe sometimes one of their more underappreciated tunes. I hope folks enjoy it.
So do you want the live in Kentworth version, or do you want the remaster? I have both.
The remaster.
Got it.
Remaster, for sure.
All right. So, everybody, thank you for tuning in. This is Achilles' Last Stand, and thank you so much for continuing to support Legalize ND and Greener Pastures. We'll see you next time. Thank you.